So, warm welcome to the Gather film discussion, Cultivating Indigenous Food Sovereignty and Local Food Webs. This conversation weaves together projects that are reclaiming native foodways and building local food webs to create resilient communities and local economies. So, hi, I'm Thea Grew from Films for the Planet. And with us today, we were hoping to have Gather cast member Chef Nephi Craig and Linda Blackelk, who's an ethnobotanist specializing in traditional foods and medicines of the Great Plain. But unfortunately, her parents are ill with COVID and she needs to be with them. So she apologizes for not being here. And also Ken Metter, author of Building Community Food Webs, and Nate Kleinman from Co-op Gardens and Experimental Farm Network Cooperative. So welcome, Nate and Ken. So also not with us today, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Gather director Sanjay Rao, who is the founder of Illumin Group and director behind popular documentaries such as Ocean Monks, Challenging Impossibility, and Food Chains. So his films educate audiences to think in depth about fair trade, the ethics of our food supply chains, and where our food products come from. I don't know about you, but I was deeply moved by the storytelling in Gather. The film is a tribute to courage and resilience, an intimate portrait of the growing movement amongst Native Americans to reclaim their spiritual, political, and cultural heritage through food sovereignty while battling the trauma of centuries of genocide. So, in the film, I was hoping to introduce our first guest, Chef Nephi Craig, and who is involved with the film and kind of get some behind the scenes stories. And I love his personal journey of healing through rediscovering native foodways. And it can only be told from a Native American perspective. So hopefully he'll be able to show up in this conversation. So also, why don't we just move on here? And Nate, starting with you, why don't, if you could just tell us a little bit about how to start a local food movement. I found out about cooperative gardens when COVID happened, and I noticed all the food lines and food shortages. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have to reboot my garden. It's been a while, and we live in a rural community and in the Northern California in the Sierra foothills. And we do grow grapes and make wine, but I felt it was really time to reboot our garden. And so I did some research to see what was going on locally, and I found Co-op Gardens, and which is a consensus-based collective working on issues that support local movements in their struggles for food sovereignty. So I was really delighted to find it, and I was really impressed with the work. And I got a message that was left on my message machine from Marcia, who said, we want to talk about growing a local food movement. And I still have the message on my machine to this day because I love the message. So anyway, Nate, how have organizations and people started organizing to build a local food movement since COVID, and what was the response at that time? I know I wasn't alone in that. And so what kind of disruptions and shocks were happening to the food system and still are?
Sure. Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here, and I also want to thank the folks who made Gather and appeared in it. I was really moved by it as well. Um, so I'll talk a little bit about who I am and how I came to be involved in all of this. Like Thea said, my name is Nate Kleinman. I'm in Nanticoke, Lenape land here, also known as Southern New Jersey, outside of Philadelphia. And about 8 years ago, I co-founded a nonprofit called the Experimental Farm Network. We are our focus is really getting people to collaborate on sustainable agriculture research and plant breeding with a focus on developing crops for climate change mitigation. We're really focused on perennial staple crop development, things like perennial grains, perennial oil seeds. And we decided very early on that we didn't want to be reliant on grants and foundations and begging for money. So we became a small scale seed company to fund our work. And the seeds have ended up becoming a major part of our work. We get a lot of seeds from U.S. government seed banks. We've sought out varieties from communities that are under threat around the world, whether by war or sea level rise or um, economic outmigration, poverty, neoliberal capitalism, all of the threats to traditional foodways around the world. And we've developed relationships with people around the world and especially on this continent. We do a lot of seed rematriation work, returning seeds to the communities where they came from originally, including with indigenous communities here and with communities in places like Syria, South Sudan, Puerto Rico. Um, Palestine, we work closely with the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library. So when COVID hit, it became very clear that there were going to be major shocks to the food system. The economy was tanking. It was clear that people were going to be struggling to put food on the table, and even if there weren't shortages in the supermarket, people were going to be having difficulties just paying for food. And of course, there were shortages of many things in the supermarkets as well, and people were fearful of going to the markets as they had every reason to be. So because I'm involved in the seed industry, we knew pretty early that there was going to be panic buying of seeds, just as there was panic buying of food.
Mm.
If you tried to buy seeds in late March or April of last year, you probably found that some of the varieties you were looking for were out of stock. Some of the seed companies that you wanted to buy from had their websites shut down or had messages up saying that it would be a 6 to 8 week delay in getting your seeds. There were labor shortages, and seed companies were trying to do things safely, so they were operating on 2 or even 3 shifts to make sure that they didn't have as many people in their packing room as they used to. And that we definitely dealt with the same thing at Experimental Farm Network, though we're a pretty small seed company. We saw our sales triple between 2019 and 2020, and then they've doubled from that level to 2021 as well. People realized because of COVID that they needed to take their food sovereignty into their own hands, and so many more people were interested in gardening and farming. Um, but it was something that the shortage of seeds was something that I knew we had to deal with. And because so many of my friends and colleagues in the seed world all were experiencing the same thing, when we put out this call through Instagram for conference call to talk about how to get more people growing food on, that was I think March 19th, about a week after the shutdown started. Um, we ended up with over 130 people on a conference call 2 days later, including many people from seed companies across the country, like Hudson Valley Seeds and Fedco Seeds, Southern Exposure, um, Seed Savers Exchange, a number of the big seed companies in the organic and non-GMO seed space. Um, and so a major part of the project, and what became the Cooperative Gardens Commission, was free seed distribution. We wanted to make sure that anybody who needed seeds could get seeds, especially if they were in a historically oppressed or marginalized community. So we have still a seed distribution working group that worked to get to organize all of this. And in Philadelphia, where I knew we could get volunteers, we had the help of a bookstore that had only opened in February and then was shuttered by the pandemic. A place called Making Worlds Bookstore that's really wonderful, let us use their space, and we started getting donations from seed companies around the country, mostly bulk donations, some in seed packets already. And then with volunteers, about 4 days a week, we just started repackaging them. And we had people around the country apply to be a seed hub. Mostly it was organizations that were already engaged in some kind of food sovereignty work, but it was also some individuals working out of their homes, schools and university projects, and really all sorts of different people. In the end, we had over 250 seed hubs in 41 states. Um, and we sent out, we think, seeds that got to about 12,000 gardens at least, and probably helped to get food into over 100,000 people or so in just a few months. And then this past year, in 2021, we did it again and found over 300 seed hubs, and now we're gearing up to do it for a third year because and we realized that the issues that we were dealing with, food insecurity, a lack of access to healthy, clean food and culturally appropriate food, is something that was a problem long before the pandemic, and in many communities will be a problem long after the pandemic is over. So yeah, that's the long and the short of it.
That's amazing. As I had the data on 2020 about the seed distribution, but I didn't know it's accelerating. That's awesome. And so, what kind of seed remitration and distribution efforts have you been involved with that are really important to you personally in your work?
Um, Thanks for asking. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mentioned the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library. That's something that's been really important to me over the last few years, in particular since I got involved. Um, I brought a little demo. This is a gourd called Yakteen that actually comes from the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library, and I've been able to I have been growing this the last couple years. I also grow a watermelon that's a Palestinian variety called Jadui. Um, a melon that's used like a cucumber. It's eaten when it's underripe, and it never gets sweet like a cantaloupe or something. It's really like a cucumber melon called fakus. That's another Palestinian variety. And I have some friends who are Palestinian American, and I've been able to return this to some of them and their family members who live in this country. Um, and that relationship with the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library started when I actually went to a family member's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem, and I was feeling pretty ambivalent about whether I should go on this trip. And I have some strong feelings about the government of Israel and the treatment of Palestinian people. But I decided if I could do something that would benefit Palestinian people, it would make the trip worthwhile. And I had some seeds that I had gotten from the U.S. USDA seed banks around the country, including a wheat from Gaza, and then a number of Syrian varieties and other things that I thought would thrive in that climate. And so I was able to bring those and give them to a representative of the seed library who I met in Ramallah, and that began a relationship that's become quite close over the last few years. And we expect to also offer these seeds in our seed company catalog over the next couple of years, with the proceeds going back to the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library. Um, I also have I brought this too. This is a corn that I grew this year actually. It's it's really beautiful. sweet corn. You can see the dimpled
Yeah,
seeds. This is called Lenape blue pulling corn, and it comes the story that it came to me with anyway is that it's a corn that was has been grown by Lenape people on the reservation in Oklahoma. Um, and it found its way to a Cherokee seed keeper in Kentucky, and then he gave some to me, and then I was able to give some over the past couple of years to Nanticoke Lenni Lenape people here in southern New Jersey, and Ramapo Lenape people in northern New Jersey, who hadn't had a relationship with this plant in who knows how many hundreds of years.
that's great.
Um, and
Wow.
we've also been able to rematriate a squash variety to those same peoples. Um, and that's certainly growing up in the Philadelphia area, I was always sort of taught that Lenape people are part of the history of this region and not part of the present. But as I've gotten older and learned and met people who are Lenape who still live in this community, I've realized just how wrong that is. And Yeah, it was the seeds that gave me an opportunity to make those connections and build those relationships. And the act of rematriating seeds to somebody is it's a really complicated process, and it's not something that it's not it shouldn't be about just having seeds and handing them to somebody, but I think it's really important to build relationships and build trust. And I think um, you know people wouldn't have been so keen to just accept seeds from me with this story unless they know who it's coming from, um, and trust that I'm giving them what I say it is, because really when it gets down to it, they only have my word. um, and this is something, it's an incredibly powerful thing to reunite someone with something that was important to their ancestors, something um, that isn't an indelible part of their culture. It's like reintroducing someone to a long lost family member, really. And so it's something that I take very seriously and don't undertake lightly. And um, yeah.
That's so beautiful. There's such a deep like cultural exchange, sense of cultural exchange in that story, and it goes both ways. We need to receive from Native Americans and learn, about their heritage and their food heritage, because that's food is such a connective thing. And it's like the table, it joins us together in a community, and food is like that central, a connective, part of our commons, and it's what brings us together. So I really appreciate that story. And something about the cooperative, gardens. It started out with the name Corona Victory Gardens, but evidently changed it. But that was named after the historic garden initiatives from the mid 1900s. And at the time, people of all ages considered gardening to be part of their civic duty. And, what exactly was happening at that time historically, and how can we regain that sense of civic duty?
Yeah, I'll talk a little briefly about that. The original call out that we posted on Instagram was said it's time for Corona Victory Gardens, and we didn't really have a plan at that point to create an organization or anything. We just wanted to encourage people to look back to that historical precedent. But very quickly, as we were reaching out to organizations and colleagues, we received a very thoughtful email from wonderful folks at Soulfire Farm in upstate New York, who pointed out that there's a lot of historical trauma associated with the term Victory Gardens and with that moment in history, in particular for Japanese Americans. In it's you know, it's not part of the mythology that we remember about Victory Gardens in World War II, but the actual push for Victory Gardens came about after the initial food shortages that started only after the Roosevelt administration um, rounded up and imprisoned and began brutally treating Japanese American people on the West Coast. At the time, it was Japanese American farmers producing about 40% of California's fresh vegetables. And so when suddenly all of them were dispossessed of their land and forced into what we euphemistically call internment camps, um, that that's when the food shortages really began. And then the people who were installed on that land, mostly white people who had been Dust Bowl farmers, were not vegetable farmers. They didn't know how to grow vegetables. They were not. They suddenly the productivity of that land plummeted, and so that was really the beginning of the Victory Gardens movement in World War II. But in World War One, there was it was mainly called War Gardens, and there was actually an organization called the National War Gardens Commission that was started by a guy in New Jersey. Um, and that organization had this very official sounding name, National War Gardens Commission, but it actually had nothing to do with the government. They had an advisory board that included people in the government and the president of Princeton University and a bunch of big muckety mucks. And they worked primarily a propaganda campaign to send had posters all over the place. They sent out pamphlets teaching people how to grow food, how to can food, and otherwise preserve food. Um, but it was really sort of a big PR campaign urging people to grow more food. They had a large model farm in New Jersey on a army base where they were growing lots and lots of food. I think over 100 acres of just potatoes, and a lot of that was to feed the soldiers at that base. They were trying to reduce the pressure on the food system in New Jersey because of all of the soldiers who were there and also needed to be fed. But we when we decided to create a real organization and come up with a name, we opted for this Cooperative Gardens Commission because we liked that sort of quasi-official sound of calling it a commission. And we like to have the word cooperative in there because it's really at the core of what we need to do in order to get more people growing food and working together. So that's yeah, that was how CGC, as we call it, came to be. And folks can visit coopgardens.org to find more information about the organization. We have we're still having monthly conference calls the first Monday of every month. We had one last night, and we'll have another one in early November. And the seed distribution working group meets every other Thursday. We have a meeting on this Thursday, and we're yeah, trying to figure out how to get things going and raise some funds as well, because we've really been, it's been entirely volunteer run at this up to this point, but we're getting to the point where we know that in order to maintain what we've been doing, especially for the folks who've been leading it in Philadelphia, and one person in particular who's really done a huge amount of the work, we know that in order to make it sustainable, we really need to be to start paying some people. And yeah, we already have had to raise money for shipping and supplies and all of that, but we have continued to and expect to continue to rely on donations from seed companies, and we've had incredibly generous donations from folks like Adaptive Seeds and Seed Savers Exchange, Hardy Seeds out in Oregon, so many wonderful seed companies, Fedco and Johnny's, and yeah, it's been a real team effort, and been really proud to be involved with it.
Fascinating. So, if you're thinking of starting a community garden or just, rebooting your own garden and connecting locally, definitely check out those links in the chat and learn more about these organizations. Fantastic. So, Ken, I wanted to get to you. Hold on, I'm going to get your book just a sec.
I was just going to add real quick. There is if you go to that website, there is a resource sharing map on the front page, and we're urging anybody who is looking for resources or has resources to share with folks who want to grow their own food to put themselves on that map so that more and more people can find people in their community to help them out.
Oh, perfect. Is that link
That's
available?
that's in the chat already. That's the Co-op
Okay,
Gardens
awesome.
link.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So, Ken, rebuilding our food webs, your book, Building Community Food Webs, highlights the importance of trust within food webs. So, you give examples of networks that can survive over generations, that are built on trust, and how budding food web ensures longevity. When so much rests on trust between individuals. So here's building community food webs. And I've been reading this. This is really well written. It's kind of an accumulation of Ken's life's work, and I want him to share more with you about that. And there's so many great stories and case studies. It's kind of like a tapestry, and each story is completely unique given the community and their challenges and what they accomplished. But you get a really good picture of not only the challenges but what is possible when we start reimagining what an kind of a regenerative food system or food web would look like, and what could be unfolding in the future. And so I just wanted to say I love the word food webs. It's really organic. It's kind of like a message from nature. It's like nature gives us webs, and humans think of systems, but I think there's an intelligence in nature that is far more sophisticated at times than we really realize. And so I really love the metaphor of food webs. And so maybe you could tell us about some of these stories. Just off the top of my head, I love the chapter about invoking traditional wisdom to recover from plantation agriculture. The project in Hawaii, that was amazing. And then how working with municipalities and how people got involved with a Metro Farmland project and the Appalachian Center for Economic Network, and how they listen to their residents. And it's just part of kind of getting past our old ideas and working together and listening and forging new pathways. So welcome, and we'd love to hear about your work, how it's evolved over the years, where it's going, and more about the book.
Well, thank you, Thea, and I really appreciate being part of this. I'm very honored to be part of this panel of responding to the movie Gather. It really was a very profound film for me to watch, and I looked at it again last night and just really loved the spirit of the film, and I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion. I should really start out by saying that I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so I'm on land that was very carefully tended by Anishinaabe and Lakota people for a long time before they were dispossessed of the land. But I was born in this house, and I took it over from my family about 30 years ago. My father was born in a log home on a farm in Nebraska and brought gardening to this yard, and I still maintain the compost pile that he started many, many years ago. And my mother was a registered nurse who really was a wonderful chef herself. And I think I mentioned in the book that I didn't really eat out very much because the food was so great at home, and it often is much better to be eating. It was better to be eating at home than going to restaurants. But After my graduation from college, which actually happened to be in Philadelphia as well, I came back to the Minneapolis looking for alternate service work because I was a conscientious objector, and I ended up living in an urban neighborhood of Minneapolis, which really turns out to be where George Floyd was murdered last year. So that was very close to some of my friends in my old neighborhood, and it also was a place where it's really the largest concentration of Native American people in the country is in the neighborhood just north of me. That gave me a real different sense of the issues facing us, just having lived and worked alongside low-income people for 20 years and really trying to understand how I could be appropriate in helping make things better. And we started some co-ops there and also started some businesses that help serve neighborhood needs. And that was a tremendous education for me. But in 78, 79, I had a chance to be a reporter for a small town newspaper. And I ended up interviewing a nest of farmers in Minnesota, a little town called Greenough. And they were conservative farmers, liberal farmers, middle of the road farmers. They were evangelical Lutherans, Catholics, Baptists. They belonged to all three of the major farm organizations from left to right. Yet they collaborated incredibly well. They made sure that they worked together to raise their children together, to go to lead a very cogent 4-H club that routinely sent kids to the state fair because their farming practices were so good. And they taught me a lot about how dismal the economics of farming were. And they also taught me a lot about the need for a community to really pull together and develop that trust and that commitment to really improving things for each other. Taking their work, I took that on to some further research, some work as a journalist during the farm credit crisis, the 1985 era. And all in all, that's led me to a cure the last 20 years or so, looking at how food systems work, not simply successful food projects or food businesses or successful ventures, but how do we really knit this together to be a system that has resilience and lasts over time? Part of that conversation has been with transition communities around the country as well. That work has taken me to 144 regions across the country in 41 states and 2 provinces, and also 4 native tribes. So it's been a really wonderful education for me to go out firsthand and see what conditions are like in so many places. So the book is really my way of trying to chronicle what I've learned, what I've seen, what the victories I've seen people win that are not really well covered in the broader media or even social networking discussions. I think the first thing I'd like to say about the book is that it really tackles the economics of food, because we have a food system that we developed because we think that it makes money. And while it certainly makes money for some people, it also takes money away from rural communities, from the very places where all that new wealth is produced on farms. And it's something that we don't like to talk about, but I also really kind of step back from the food system and say, what's a food system supposed to accomplish? And my point is that it's 4 things. It's really not just about making money. It's really supposed to build food systems, in my mind, as you said, Lethea, are very strongly rooted in culture, and they're really the heart of all of our cultural threads. But food systems should build health in our communities. They should build wealth in our communities. They should build connections and cultural strength in our communities, and they should build the capacities of knowing how to handle food well. And what the remarkable thing is that our food system is failing on all 4 of those counts, really pretty badly. And I can go through a whole conversation about that, but we won't have time tonight. The one I'd like to focus on is that because economics is sort of seen as the main justification for the system we have, which is really a system in which farmers raise raw materials for industrial processing, not food for people. And that whole commoditized system has sucked $4 trillion out of rural America over the last century. $4 trillion is a little bit more than we're now talking about as a single bill in Congress for infrastructure. So it may not sound like a lot of money, but if you compare that with the total net worth of all the farms in the country right now, which is $3 trillion, it's really an amazing amount of money to lose from a rural sector and from even white communities and even the kind of larger, more successful farms that we are coping with. One of my paths has been to track that extraction of wealth, $4 trillion out of rural America. But also I'm very interested in what people are doing to try to make things better. And the book includes that analysis, but it also includes 8 profiles of communities I really have loved working with. And you mentioned some of the highlights already. So I'll just kind of touch on those very quickly. The first chapter of stories is from Montana, where we had a crisis in the 1980s, very similar to the one we're facing now, where farm income was low and farmers were realizing they're burning out the soil. They were planting crops they didn't really want to plant because they thought it was the only way to make money, and they were losing money doing that. And in the middle of that crisis, an energy group called AERO, Alternate Energy Resource Organization in Montana, decided to convene groups at neighborhood level, very small groups of 3 to 5 people. And they gave them very small grants, maybe $200, maybe $600 to try something new, either develop a new crop, develop a new soil health technique, develop some new approach that would make their lives better and give us an answer to that farm credit crisis. And those small scale experiments done at the neighborhood level resulted in a statewide network involving 600 people across Montana who were organized into 200 local groups. So a combination of very strong local discussion, very vibrant activity to make things better, and then a statewide network that brought people into conversation about how to keep that work going and how to extend its influence. And Montana not only turned that situation around in very strong ways, it also became a national leader in thinking about how to reconfigure our food webs. And the next chapter, as you said, is about Hawaii and about the way that we have this amazing plantation system that was imposed on Hawaii, which itself, it created huge inequities. It created real estate imbalances that led to further investment in real estate for profit rather than strong communities. And the plantation system itself, as strong as it was, as much it had to rejiggle legislation and policy to sustain itself. It collapsed totally at the end of 2016 because the whole model of the plantation system was to exploit people, exploit labor, especially, but also to export food off the islands to somewhere else. So it developed an export economy on islands that had been totally self-sufficient for food. And Hawaii historically had actually fed as many people as live on the islands now using traditional methods, traditional crops, hand tools, just a very well-organized society that made that possible. It was really an incredible thing to dismantle. And now that plantation system is gone and we're left with kind of a tourist-based economy, people are going back to really find that traditional culture gives very strong insights into how to move forward together, how to reconnect with the land, with the watersheds, with local planning, with better local health. And I can't speak to Hawaii the way the Hawaiians that I talked to can, but one of the things that was really amazing was a neighborhood health clinic in a very low-income neighborhood of Honolulu that decided to start. First of all, they bought a farm up in the height of the watershed where the rains start, and that was a traditional farm site that had gone vacant. And they reclaimed that farm, started growing medicines, vegetables on that land, and they brought those down to downtown Honolulu. They also started a restaurant featuring those foods and other foods from local farms, and they brought people who were low-income people into the clinic to have a good meal of healthy foods, to help them learn more and also to get training in how to cook better, to meet each other and to sort of gather around feeding ourselves with better foods rather than living with what we were given. It's a really very inspiring story for me to tell. And I think my favorite story of that was that the health practitioners were talking about how they got sort of told by professionals they should help people to get more exercise. And they were trying to translate the word exercise into Samoan language, some of the Micronesian languages that for the Micronesian population that live in Hawaii. And there was no word for exercise. But they said, well, let's garden together. And everybody understood gardening. They all knew how to garden, and they knew that would give them exercise. So instead of kind of talking about an exercise regimen, they started working together and reclaiming some of the historical ways of growing food. Very much like I think what Nate was talking about with sharing seeds and really sharing those stories at a very local level. And the final story, the final 2 stories is, first of all, we had a wonderful story from Brighton, Colorado, where a couple of farm people, including a Japanese farm family that had been interred in 1945 and in the war and gotten out in 1945, ran a very successful vegetable farm. And another farm that has now been there in the same community for 100 years. And the people in a small farm called the Berry Patch, the people started talking about how do we protect this farmland against suburban development. And it was a very contentious discussion because a lot of people who lived there had moved there because they had land and they wanted the quiet rural quality of living in this Colorado community close to Denver. And yet they also wanted to sell their land for the top dollar to a developer because that was the only way they could see making money from their property. So you had these people who in the same sentence would argue for and against protecting farmland without even realizing the irony of what they were doing. And big arguments broke out, and it was a very contentious time. Well, the conclusion of all that was people, some landscape architects came in and let people talk about their different viewpoints, let them vent their frustrations, let them vent their opinions. And my research showed that I did a market study, which showed that basically even the established farms in this area for 50 years, 100 years, could not afford to buy the land they were on because it was too expensive. The land costs were $30,000 an acre, and it took $30,000 more an acre to pay for water rights. So you had to pay $60,000 to buy land if you wanted to farm it. And I made the argument to the city and the county. I said, if anyone's going to buy land here for the purpose of agriculture, it will be public body, because very few individuals I know are going to spend that kind of money to buy land just to sit on it. And those two agencies worked together very well. They raised some money and they purchased land at the development value at $60,000 an acre to protect it for agriculture, which cannot pay those prices. And they hope to protect a total of 1,500 acres in their community that will be kept for agricultural use. And that also became this center of a whole branding campaign to brand the community, not around suburban expansion, but around their heritage of raising food. And it's a really exciting turnaround that happened that I was really pleased to be a part of. And the final story I'll just tell very quickly is that Dakota County, Minnesota. I know someone from Dakota County is on the webinar tonight, but Dakota County has done a wonderful job of creating networks of green space. And I love the way that they're webbing green space, the way that I talk about food webs, and how that's been a way of protecting wildlife access to the river. This county borders the Mississippi River. And it also creates amenities, which has helped developers feel like land prices will be higher because people want to buy homes close to green space. But it's also laid the foundation for Hmong farmers and other organic farmers that have sprung up in the community that are raising food for the urban markets in the Twin Cities as well. And those are just 4 of the 8 stories in the book. So that's a real highlight of the book. But I really, I'm very pleased to be able to kind of convey this to you. And the book concludes with just a few chapters showing my broader themes that kind of drive my work. One of which is that I hear a lot of people talking about that it's really essential to go to scale and make things very large. And I think that Nate's work and the stories in my book really talk about how very small scale stuff done in lots of places can have a bigger impact than someone who gets too big too quickly.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's kind of a rebalancing between global economies and globalization, and it's taken away so much power, as you say, from the local communities, and we need to rebalance that and really take heart, in just the power of local communities, because it always used to be that way, right, throughout all history. And so getting back to that is part of our mandate, I think. So I wanted to encourage people to think about community engagement, and I'm glad that you brought up that the part of the story in Colorado where they had kind of a branding initiative where they were retelling the story to get community buy-in, and that it worked really, really well for the community, and that was kind of one of the linchpins to really turn things around. And so I think, our communities are so individualistic and divided on so many levels, and that again, I think the table is the metaphor. It's the place of communion. It's a place where we all come together. And I just really wanted to have everyone give our viewers examples of how to engage their communities through stories, garden expos, school gardens, traditional cooking classes, seed saving, foraging gatherings. There's so many creative ideas and that we can generate to welcome our communities and invite them in and just find that common ground, that's just so lacking, and rebuild our local economies. And so, are there any ideas that you would have for inspiration? And before, I also wanted to just really invite people to check out Linda Black Elk's work, and Rowan White. There's so many great Native American food movement stories, and there's a beautiful seed sovereignty, native seed sovereignty movement. Nate was talking about all his work with seeds, and just combining, these cultures in our communities and inviting people to come together. Nate had so many awesome stories on that, and so, what do you have some ideas for inspiration for just to get people thinking like, oh, what can I do to welcome my community and invite them into a conversation? And and I'd like to add to that, film, of course, is a really good catalyst for community conversation. We've seen movement starts time and again with film. So, are there any ideas here? And I'd also like to hear from our viewers. Just put in the chat if you have any ideas about what would be a good source of community engagement.
Well, I guess I can jump in. For me, um, so much of my work is inspired by seeds and is rooted in seed work. And um, one of the beautiful things about seeds is that every part of this country has heritage seeds that come from your area. And in many cases, there are not organizations that were set up to preserve those seeds. And it's not just seeds either. It's also plants that are traditionally propagated through cloning, like grafting. So there are apple trees that come from every corner of this country. There are plums and peaches and pears and cherries and currants and grapes and gooseberries and raspberries and blackberries and pretty much you name it. There are plants that are probably at risk of being lost. And in some cases, these might only exist on one farm at this point. I've been involved with a project that we're still trying to get off the ground. We're calling it a lost crop project in Philadelphia, trying to make sure that crops that have a historical connection to the Philadelphia area don't get lost. And I worked with a bunch of students at Bryn Mawr College over the past few years, and one of the crops that they identified as having a historical connection was called the Dr. Apple. It was this really wonderful apple variety, and when we first identified it as something that was missing or lost, we didn't know if we would ever find it, and that was the first one before we even had a chance to launch the project that one of the students found growing on a single farm in upstate New York. And as far as we know, it's not growing anywhere else. So we're working to get things from that tree and make sure that it's safe. But there are all sorts of heirloom seeds, and some of them are in government seed banks already, but they may not be in the community where they came from anymore. And then there's varieties as well that just may or may not exist at all, and they may be hiding in one person's in the top drawer of a workshop desk or something. There's that one farmer has who's 80 years old, and hasn't grown in years, but those seeds are still viable sitting in that drawer, and you never know until you start looking for them. So the seeds are definitely, for me, a source of inspiration, and I think they can help to spark people's imagination. But I also do want to mention, you mentioned foraging, and that's something that is that helped me get into food when long before I became a farmer. Um, I became interested in learning about the plants that were in my area. You know, there are lots and lots of books on farming, but on foraging, but some of the classics like Stalking the Wild Asparagus by Yule Gibbons is you know, as good as it was when it was written many decades ago, and that you know, I think um, trying to find where these plants are that you can eat in your community, learning what is safe to eat, organizing group trips to go out looking for things. And I have right here one of the seeds that we sell. We Experimental Farm Network sells a lot of perennial crops, and we sell seeds for a lot of foraged crops with the hopes that people will work to improve them and develop them into more productive crops that can be grown on farms. And one of the things that we're working on is the maypop passion fruit, which looks like this. It's the farthest north passion fruit species. It grows in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. These come from seeds that we got from the farthest north wild populations of this plant. And this is now a second generation from the breeding project that is growing in my backyard here in Elmer, New Jersey. And it's delicious. You can't imagine how good this thing tastes. And it's like a tropical fruit that grows in New Jersey. And until people start looking for things like this, they're not going to have any idea that these exist in their communities. But there's so many wonderful foods, and these are things that are that in particular people from indigenous communities have the strongest connection to. And in many cases, a plant like this probably had its range extended by indigenous people many centuries before European people started colonizing this continent. And so this is something like plants like this, like pawpaws, persimmons, May apples. These plants probably had their range extended quite a bit historically by Native American people. And so preserving these things, preserving the habitats for these plants is critically important for human culture, for cultural preservation, and also for the environment, for wildlife and biodiversity.
That's
And I'm going to
great.
be quiet and a little bit of this while I
Thank,
pass it over to
thank you,
Ken.
Nate.
Those are great stories, Nathan. Thanks very much. Yeah, I guess the story I wanted to throw into this circle would be another one from the book. It's from Tucson, Arizona, and a food bank that really has dedicated its mission to trying to help lower income people develop civic engagement, develop power in running the food bank itself, and start new businesses, start getting active politically, and so on. But the gardening part of the story was a guy named Moses Thompson who got a job at a school in Tucson, and he was a counselor. And one day he was walking past the central courtyard of the school, and he realized there was this vacant lot that no one was using. And he went to the superintendent and said, "Can I use that for a garden?" And they said, "Sure." So he started tilling the soil and building it up a little bit. And he realized over time that as he was working in the garden, kids would come out and just hang out with him and start wanting to help him out. And as he learned the kids and he learned about what they were wanting to do, he told me a wonderful story about, I would take some of the problem kids and I would try to talk to them with counseling skills I've been taught in school. And I really wasn't getting through to them the way I wanted to. But I started inviting them out to come out and work with me in the garden. And just by sitting in the garden, and working together and sharing the digging and sharing the weeding and whatever they were doing, the kids opened up and they started talking and they started getting more animated. And they kind of got out of some of their psychological woes because they were doing something real with their hands and they had a friend doing it with them. And that's, I think, a really good example of the kind of one of the themes of the movie Gather, which is that working together around food gathering is a very healing process. And that's very different than the process that our commodified food system gives us. And it's a really great example of why gardening has multiple benefits on so many levels.
I think one of the stories that I think about in the film was when Chef Neffy founded the cafe Goju, and he collaborated with a local farm, and they just ended up kind of disrupting food deserts and revitalizing the local agriculture and cultural traditions and entrepreneurship. And so the farm, the People's Farm, which I was referring to, they had community events, they had garden expos attracting hundreds of people, and they had Apache harvest celebrations that drew hundreds of people, and farmers markets, of course, and major projects that were certified through the USDA, and construction of passive solar greenhouse, and completing a community center for building school gardens. So, that's just one way, one project. Like, this was a restaurant that converted, an old, what was it, an old
Gas station.
gas station. Yeah, how cool is that? And so, and it just kind of started spiraling outward into the community in so many amazing ways. And then the community caught on and started, just drifting off of that. And so you had all these great projects, and that's how it all happens. And so it just takes the listening and some creative thinking. And yeah, it's very cool. All these great stories. So a lot of examples out there to learn from, and we love to hear, and if anybody
I could really quickly tell one more too. Just I've had a chance to work with Dream of Wild Health here in Minnesota. I'm not sure if you've had contact with them, Nate, but that's a wonderful effort that was started by some tribal people north of the Twin Cities, and that was begun because an elder had saved seeds for about 30 years, just had put them away and had not planted them out, just sort of said, "It's really important for me to keep these seeds for future generations to have them." And as she got older, she came to some people in the community and said, "These are my seeds. I want you to take care of them. I want you to grow them out and keep them for more people." And folks took her desire seriously, and they started a farm north of the Twin Cities called Dream of Wild Health, which is really focused on growing those seeds out, but also growing food, vegetables, which end up being part of CSA shares that are directed to lower income communities in the Native community in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Women who are living in the communities get to come out and work in the farms and hang out together and get good meals together and develop a sense of spiritual renewal and connection with each other by working in the garden. And it's an amazing story just about how a gift of seeds really over 30 years led to this really phenomenal activity, especially in low-income communities, where I think really the answer for so many of the marginalized communities we have in this country is that when people grow their own food and know how to take care of themselves for growing their own food, they have a lot better handle on how to eat better, and a lot more likelihood of having food security than if they're simply consuming food that's given to them.
It's that kind of lost
Yeah.
connection.
I wanted to also highlight a project that I've worked with as well. I mentioned the Ramapo Lenape people from North Jersey and the border with New York. This is an indigenous people whose history is really marked by so much marginalization, to say the least, and really true oppression. And they are not federally recognized. At times, they've not been recognized by the state of New Jersey as well, though at this point they are recognized by the state. They actually had their recognition rescinded in the Chris Christie administration, and then it was restored in the Phil Murphy administration that in power currently. But they live in an area that's about 45 minutes from New York City, and in the mountains in North Jersey. They've been where their homeland is. They were exposed to toxic waste by the Ford Motor Company for many years. Their land became a Superfund site, and it was actually removed from the Superfund list for a while, and then after much protest was put back on when the government finally admitted that the land was not cleaned up properly and is still a toxic waste dump and causing terrible health impacts for people. And so the Turtle Clan chief of the Ramapo people, a man named Vincent Mann, and his wife Michaeline Picaro, and she's a clan mother. They developed a project in the last couple of years called the Muncie Three Sisters Medicinal Farm, and the intention is to use farming to create economic opportunity for people in their community, and to produce healthy organic food for people to eat, because obviously the health of their people has been so devastated by how they've been forced to live. And it's a really inspirational project. It's been an honor to be involved with it. We're working with the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New Jersey to help them gain access to more land and more resources. And folks can find more information about the Ramapo people and their history online. This is having again, as I said, having grown up with the belief that there were not any indigenous people in this area anymore. I've realized how that narrative serves the interests of people in power who don't want to admit that they are responsible for a great deal of historical wrongs that really need to be righted. And that's something that I would not have learned without the seeds and the relationships that they've brought about.
So we have a question here. Can the speakers say something about the roles of middlemen in the food webs, how they can be helpful or harmful?
I can tackle that first anyway, because there's a pretty good story about that in my book, which I think is really worth repeating. First thing, what I'd say is middle people are very important to a food web. You have to have buyers, and you have to have buyers who are really committed to working closely with farmers, making sure the farmers get a fair price and are treated well, and that also represent the best of the farming practices to the consumers. So they can play a very critical role. But they're also in an industry which really has very low margins and is very competitive. So you have to be careful to know how to work with them. I think the trouble story I have would be from Omaha, Nebraska, where a group of farmers from Iowa got together and started selling organic produce to a Whole Food store in Omaha. And they had it worked out so well that they had a really good relationship, and the buyer was really enthusiastic and really supportive of the growers. And she was able to get a little kiosk in the front of the store so that Iowa organic produce was featured when you walked into the store. First thing you saw was this kiosk. And it was going along fairly well. And then after about 6 months, her bosses basically said to her, "We found another source for asparagus that's $1 a pound cheaper. So tell the farmers they have to reduce their price." And the farmers had been through this mill before, so they were savvy enough to say, "We're not going to change our price. Give us 1 more week, and you can put that other asparagus up there next to ours, and we'll keep ours at the same price, and let's see what happens." And at the end of that week, the buyer called them back and said, you know, we're going to keep buying from you because our shoppers are used to your product. They're willing to pay a little higher price to get a higher quality product. And it's that loyalty and that kind of sense of connection that people get between farmers and consumers that's really a key part of building market power for farmers. It also is a matter of policy, but that's very hard to get past right now. And I think the book also has some more scary stories about how buyers have really been bad middlemen and have really sort of worked in very difficult, made very difficult situations for farmers. But I think in a good food web, you'll have local middle people who are very righteous, work with a lot of integrity. They almost have to be independently owned, or they're not going to really follow the needs of the community. They're more, if it's a big chain, they're going to follow the dictates of the shareholders or a distant manager. But there are some people in food webs that are playing very important roles in training farmers, in making sure they're in convening farmers. They meet each other, as we've had in Phoenix, and a lot of other good stories that food buyers have taken on. Red tomatoes are another great example. Speaking of apples, it's really done a great job of brokering farmers and buyers around an apple brand in New England. So there's some really great examples to work with out there too.
Yeah, was going to mention in the Philadelphia area, there's an organization called Common Market that started, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, and works with farmers, mostly small farmers, to help get their products to market and get them a fair price. It's really important that more organizations like this crop up, because it's incredibly difficult to make a living as a small farmer, and you know, for a while, I think many people thought that well, the explosion of interest in farmers markets was going to be great for farmers, and some farmers have a model that they're able to make it work, but most of the farmers I know who sell at farmers markets are you know, they're struggling there, and it's an improvement, but it's not you know, for most people, it's still not a great way to make money. Community supported agriculture, CSAs, farmers doing farm shares. These can be useful for getting farmers you know, some funds at the beginning of the season, but also these models have not proven to be a silver bullet to make life better for farmers. And I think if we had more organizations like Common Market that were working to get top dollar for farmers to sell direct to restaurants who are maybe willing to pay a higher price, although obviously in the pandemic the restaurant industry is not doing so well either, to sell to markets. You know, this is something that we need to, and also for farmers to work together on value-added products that people might be willing to spend more money for, to buy something that's produced locally, local pickles or fermented products, rather than jams or things like that, rather than buying from some big national company or international company. I think that the cooperative model is something that that is really powerful, and there's a long history in this country of farmers coming together and putting their own interests first, and when we have powerful cooperatives, that's really good for farmers. But cooperatives don't generally just organize themselves. It takes some leadership, and farmers, you know, there are opportunities for middle people to do things that are really important for farmers and can be really helpful for the whole food system. So I think, yeah, I'm really I like hearing all the things that you're saying, Ken, and I'm looking forward to reading your book one of these days. After seed season, I got a lot of seeds to process right now.
I hear you.
So I'm just zooming through the comments, and there's another comment here that says propagating native plants and starting their rewilding into expanded greenways is important work. So people and other living things can then forage in the spaces that are not gardened. Yes, to all the above. So I think rewilding is a great conversation, and how that works hand in hand also with foraging. So great point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's from Laura. And also, there's a question. Can you comment on the horrific food loss at the onset of the pandemic? I think we kind of covered that early on, more or less, when we were talking about the demand, for seeds and local food initiatives. People were kind of waking up to the need to that. But if you'd like to add something, that would be great. And
Yeah, I think the what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was really just a symptom of our fractured food system. We had things. Um, you have farmers who sell to institutions. That was a huge part of the food waste at the beginning of the pandemic, where you had milk being dumped and zucchinis being plowed into the fields, and animals being slaughtered that were being put into huge pits because they were the institutions that normally would have bought those things weren't there, and the farmers who are producing those things, they don't have the ability to store them. They don't have the ability to they can't suddenly freeze 100 head of hogs that they've got at the right size to go through the meat packing system. They can't get any bigger, and they've got a new set in the pipeline. The same thing with the zucchinis. Those zucchinis are only ripe. Anybody who's grown zucchini knows that they turn into a giant baseball bat that nobody wants to eat just a week or two after they're the perfect size. So if you don't harvest them right then, they're going to go to waste. And so having a more nimble food system, having more of those local food hubs, having systems where we have food banks that are set up to take fresh food and not just canned food. Having communal processing centers, community kitchens, community refrigerators. In Philadelphia, there's a movement now in a lot of cities I know for community fridges that are right there on the street, and people donate food, and people can come and collect it. So I think this is it was horrible to see all of that waste, but given the complexity and the size of our food system, it was really inevitable that was going to happen. And I wish we had the capacity to see all of those zucchini turned into soup that gets canned and saved for winter, to see that milk turned into cheese, and we just that unfortunately that is not the way. That's not the system that we have.
yeah, I mean, food waste is just a topic in itself. It's such a huge problem, the waste and how it could be used for good with all the hungry people in the world. It's just staggering how the system is set up. So anyway, but there's another question. Um, And this is a great question. Are there any examples of suburban cooperation, people agreeing to collectively grow a variety of crops and share? I think that's a great question.
Well, I think, the stories that I told about Brighton, Colorado and Dakota County, Minnesota are both suburban stories. And I think the story I would start with would be in Dakota County. It was very interesting. We had a whole influx of Hmong immigrants after the Vietnam War because they felt like they had to flee the Southeast Asia at the time. And between Lutheran Social Services and Catholic relief agencies. They were connected with people who had sponsored them and put them up in the Twin Cities. And the University of Minnesota had some land that they let some of the Hmong farmers use, because many of the farmers who came really basically wanted to farm, and that was their main skill. And that became unworkable over time. And so a landowner in the community basically said to the Hmong growers, "You can come lease my land at a very reasonable rate." So we now have about 50 or 60 farms on his farm. And last time I drove by the farm, I was noticing that several neighbors have now also leased their land to the Hmong growers, because the Hmong growers are raising vegetables for people they care about, and they were losing money planting corn, and they really were not. They were, these are mostly suburban people who had land and weren't necessarily farmers, but they liked the rural lifestyle, and they really had no reason to keep farming corn and spraying their land. So you've seen this initial cooperation flourish into bigger and bigger cooperation over time, as more landowners realized that they could help the Hmong growers too. Another really good example I would put forward would be this is a little bit more exurban than suburban, but in Lisbon and around Lewiston, Auburn, Maine, there's a group of Somali Bantu farmers that have been able to buy some land with the help of the Agrarian Trust. And what I really liked about that effort is, first of all, they're people who hold very true to growing food for their own community, and very culturally appropriate foods when they're able to. They worked very gradually and very collaboratively with their neighbors to build a market, to build recognition, to build visibility. And their idea when they bought this land was that they wanted to have a cluster of houses close to each other so they could live in more of a village setting, the way they had been used to living in Africa. And then the farms would surround them. This is actually the same vision as the Hmong growers have in Minnesota, basically creating a village that's agricultural rather than being separated on farms that are miles from each other, or surrounded by thousands of acres of product that is going for export. And those are both some models that really kind of test our idea of suburban life and test our model of even urban living, but mostly of rural living, and really kind of give us the sense of there's a different way of living in the land. It's more about being rooted in culture and taking care of each other and being close and in collaboration with each other, rather than being competitive and kind of surrounded more by machinery and by big rows of commodities. I think there's a lot of community gardening happening in suburban areas all over the country. I don't have a really classic story about that from my experience, but certainly, Seattle's had a pea patch program for a long time that has really focused on placing people in gardens, community gardens in King County, Washington. I assume some of those are in sort of suburban areas or peri-urban areas of Washington. There's those wonderful suburban gardens in Europe, where in Holland and in Germany and many countries in Europe, people basically rent a plot of land out in the countryside, and they can often take a train out there. They can build a shed where their tools are, and they're able to grow food in a community garden setting, but also to have the security that they own that piece of land or have a lease on that land and can stay there and build the soil over time. And it becomes a very important source of food, but also for recreation and enjoyment as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a great friend in the Netherlands who has had the same plot of land for 30 years, and it's really his second home.
Yeah.
But I also was going to mention, as a seed farmer, it's really it can be really important to build connections with suburban farmers and urban farmers for isolation purposes. I farm in a rural area here in southern New Jersey, and it's this corn is something that I hardly ever try to grow corn anymore, because because there's so much GMO corn grown in my neck of the woods. And if that corn pollen can fly 5 miles in the air, and once it infects um, a line of corn, I can't get rid of those genes, and and within a few generations they're there. But some of the places that are most isolated from genetically modified industrial farming are urban and suburban communities, that with suburban sprawl, they might be easily 5 miles from the nearest person growing any genetically engineered corn. And it's not just corn. There are plenty of other crops that spread on the wind, like beets and spinach. And genetically modified sugar beet is a major crop. And then even insect pollinated crops like zucchini. There's now genetically modified zucchini on the market. So it's really important as a seed farmer to have relationships with people all over the country in communities where they're isolated from these things, in order to for us to maintain purity of various crops. As a seed farmer, I only grow one melon at a time because melon are pollinated by bugs that can fly a quarter mile or half a mile. So this year, I grew this. These are the seeds from melon from Xinjiang, Western China, where the ongoing genocide against Uyghur Muslim people is ongoing. And if I have because I have relationships with growers all around the country, we can continue offering many more than just one melon in our catalog. But I can't grow those all by myself. So it really requires collaboration just to maintain the genetic diversity that is it's so critical to our food security in the long run, especially in the face of climate change.
Hmm. Excellent points. Thank you. Well, if there's it says how about pesticide use in rural? Okay, I think yeah, pesticide use in rural and urban areas. Um, I think the same thing could be said as with GMOs. Pretty much, wouldn't you agree on that? Or
Yeah, you're much less likely to have a crop duster go overhead in a suburban community, and you're not going to get the drift of these pesticides that get volatilized and get into the atmosphere. So, it's rural areas have that to deal with, but unfortunately, suburban areas also have their problems with with pesticides, with overuse of Roundup and things that homeowners are using on their properties. And I have every hope that as we become um, more cognizant of the health effects of these chemicals, that they will come off the market, and it will become safer. But at the moment, I think both places are can be pretty can be pretty dangerous as far as chemical exposure. But if you have access to your own land, or people who have access to their own land and have the ability to create screens by planting taller plants with a lot of foliage on the edge, you can create a pretty a relatively safe environment. But then, something like glyphosate, the main ingredient in Roundup, is found in the rain now because it's so ubiquitous in the environment. And we really need concerted political action to get these things off the market. That's my perspective anyway.
again, another conversation, and then you could add to that PFAS in our water. It's just kind of endless how many chemicals are out there that are turning out to be cocktails, chemical cocktails. So, um, wow, this has been so fantastic. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and uh, I'm really grateful that you were able to share all these great stories and your experience, um, and just tie so many great ideas together for all of us. And so thank you so much. And if you haven't seen the film yet, Gathered, the let's see, go to Films for the Planet, sign up for the film series, and I think we've got about 2 more days to watch it for free. And it's a great film. I highly recommend it. It's really inspiring. And so yeah, some great chat, and we put a lot of links in. There's a lot of great resources in our chat. And I just want to thank everybody again so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Great to be part of this, Thea. Thank you. And good to meet you, Nate, and everyone else.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
Are we wrapping up? It's 9:30. Sorry, or yeah, 7:30. What time is it? We're a little early. Are there no more questions? Sorry to barge in.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, I guess you didn't really give. So sorry. I'm no, all respect, but you didn't really give folks. You didn't say like last call for questions. There might be others. I don't know if the speakers are still up for it, but
Yeah, we were
sorry.
trying to
Thank
wrap
you.
it up around 6:30, and so I've been trying to check the chat for questions. If
Yeah,
any,
okay. Just like a last call. There might be. Just because it seems it's early, so it seems abrupt. To me it does at least. Just we've got a big room full of people here. Thank
okay,
you.
sure. If anybody has some more questions, feel free to type those in to the chat. It's kind of hard scrolling through all this, so if it comes up now.
And folks are welcome to, if you want to stay in touch. My website was put up there earlier, but you can also find me through our seed store website here. If you send a message to that, it'll get to me, or our other website as well.
Yeah, Jules says that the sessions usually go for 2 hours. We're missing 2 speakers. So,
Oh, okay. I see. So you guys are in the hot seat. Yeah.
yeah,
That's too
2.
bad. Okay, right.
We
There were
had.
2 others scheduled. I have a sort of a suggestion that I wouldn't mind hearing feedback on. I think it's relevant to a lot of us.
Yeah.
That I commented that it would be helpful to offer a package of seeds that a suburban group of households could purchase and divide amongst themselves toward the suburban cooperation model that was asked about earlier. Right, it's a suggestion for you, Nate. I guess would that be something you would do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe
Could see.
would certainly think about it. Our model is we don't really sell collections. We pretty much sell one variety at a time. But I think if people are interested in collaborating with their neighbors, things like that, we'd be happy to provide suggestions for a way that suites of things that they might make that would make sense for people to grow collaboratively. And it is when you are in a suburban, if you're thinking about seed saving and you're in a suburban context, it is really important to know your neighbors and to know what they're growing, because like I said, if you're growing melons or squash or watermelons or cucumbers, or so many other different crops, basil or anything that's not a self-pollinator like peas or lettuce or tomatoes or things like that. It's really important to know what's growing within a quarter mile or half a mile of where you are, because you're not likely to be able to keep things pure for seed saving purposes without that. Yeah.
Well, it's a thought as far as promoting local agriculture is the idea of suburban cooperatives, because I think people like to be part of something, and they might not be willing to garden on their own, but if it's something that they can do as part of a group, it might be more appealing. Could become more popular. It already is, but even more so.
And there's a good story from Detroit. This is not really a suburban story, but it's something that could be done in any suburb. But some of the community gardens in Detroit have bought seeds in bulk. So they buy a big package of seeds and they take them to a shed in the community garden and they portion them out in teaspoons to people who want the seeds, so that they're saving money on buying the seeds, but they're also working together to decide who's going to grow what, and they can get more leverage out of a little bit of money by buying in large quantities and then divvying them up into small packets.
Ah, that's awesome. Is that being is that being shared, that experience documented somewhere, or they have a website, I guess?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. Maybe Detroit. It's been 10 years since I heard that story. I don't know of any place that's documented, but it might well be.
Yeah, you can certainly Google it, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm putting in the chat another group. My friend Josh Witten has an organization called Make Soil, and it's a great group. They're organizing, wow, around the world. A lot of communities are just getting together for composting and doing that together and learning about, soil and did that come up in the chat? I'll put it in again. Okay, there it is. So that's another way that another organization that people can get involved with. And I'm thinking more in terms of community engagement again and just doing things together. And this can definitely happen on a suburban level. So that might be of interest to some of you. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to wrap it up. And we were sorry to miss Linda Black Elk and Chef Neffy Craig. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to more people watching the film and starting community gardens.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
So thank you, Ken. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joel, for tech hosting, and thank you, everybody.